Hi, John. We're so excited to have you here today on today's episode. So thank you for your time. With that being said, I'll just get started with the first question. So to begin, could you please provide an overview of your educational journey, starting from your post-secondary education and leading up to your current position? Could you also elaborate on the various roles or positions you have undertaken throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So like yourself, I attended Western for my undergrad. And at the time I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I initially enrolled with the plan of maybe seeking out med school. It took me all about 2 weeks to realize that is probably not the way it's going to go. So, it was definitely one of those moments where coming from a family of immigrants, there was definitely a sort of a push to go in a particular direction. For a lot of my life, I kind of just went along with it. But it was really there that I kind of realized that undergrad for me really wasn't a time for me to necessarily just lock in what I wanted to do, but more time for me to explore. So that's more or less what I did. Eventually, I ended up working at St. Joseph's Hospital, doing a bit of medical research there. It was a really fascinating period of my life, but it was tough being stuck in a lab by myself. Wasn't it the sort of environment where I realized I could really thrive in. So by the time third year rolled around, I ended up deciding to switch. And I ended up doing a double majors between my original program along with philosophy. And that helped to give me a little bit more perspective.
Yeah, definitely. That's really inspiring that you were able to break out of that bubble, like you mentioned. My next question, could you share your journey of establishing and leading multiple ventures in the legal and educational sector? What were the driving factors behind your decision to pursue entrepreneurship and create organizations such as Codify Legal Publishing, JD Ready, Dominion Mock Trial, Evocation Academy, and Hodlebot?
Honestly, a lot of it really came from my friends. Back when I was in school, the idea of entrepreneurship never really crossed my mind. The original plan was always to go in, get reasonably good grades, and then figure things out from there. But one of the sort of plus sides of the university environment, especially Western, as I saw it, was the social aspect. And during my time there, I did my best to really socialize with as many different people as I possibly could, particularly people who weren't doing the same thing that I was. So eventually I ended up living with a group of people, many of whom were really, really interested in business. I started working with them on a few small things. For a lot of their projects, they would have me help them out with a little bit of the product design as the resident artist in the group. But there was also a few promises we made to each other that the day that I ended up becoming a lawyer, I would work with them and help represent the community, right? So yeah, a lot of it really was finding inspiration and seeing the journeys of others and seeing their passion and their drive to build something new. Special shout out to Calvin Leon and Anthony Z, two of the co-founders of Autobots and some of my best friends who are absolutely killing it, along with Brady Walker and Matt Roberts, who have been working on Brick, which is a portable charging solution. Cool project, and yeah, it's pretty much all over Canada now. And really excited to see where it goes. And last but not least, Richard Kelly, who was our resident Ivy grad. So he's an upcoming inventor who has been working on designing numerous projects over the last couple of years using a 3D printer. He launched the project last year, did a really good job of getting funded through Kickstarter. The project is now in full production and it's rolling out. So I really just had the good fortune of being surrounded by good friends who were passionate about entrepreneurship, like-minded individuals with a lot of big dreams. That kind of inspired me as well to try building something for myself.
Yeah, definitely. That's very inspiring. And would you say that artificial intelligence has affected your ability to pursue an entrepreneurial venture that we discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually did go to class. Yeah, I should clarify this sometimes. I mean, the way I talk, it makes it seem like I spent my entire time there just socializing. But, I did go to class. But, as another sort of side project, I did get fairly into artificial intelligence during my time at school. It had really nothing to do with my stuff in class. I just happened to be a huge sci-fi geek. So the concept of artificial intelligence and the social impacts that it would have has always been something that got me interested. And yeah, a lot of my current drive in terms of entrepreneurship is really realizing how transformative a lot of the technologies that are coming out are, and both the positive and the negative effects of these technologies on the human condition. AI has definitely been at the top of the list since really the start of the journey. So yeah, really excited to see a lot more recent developments in it and how it's really changed people's perceptions of technology, as well as what the future might look like.
Yeah, definitely. It's an exciting time to keep an eye on that industry. It's changing so much, and especially with its effect on entrepreneurial ventures and that role that it plays as well. So thank you for answering that question. I'm also going to pass it off to Crystal for the next few questions. So Crystal, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you so much, John, for talking about your path from what seemed to be med school to something almost completely unrelated. So my question to you is, as a director at HODLBots, a company operating in the crypto space, what specific roles do you play within the organization? And how does your extensive background in law, education, and business intersect with the work you carry out at HODLBot?
Thanks, Crystal. And yeah, great to see you. That's a good question. And I'm glad you guys brought up Codify. It was definitely a fairly new project for me at the time to be working on. Just to clarify, it's a project I'm really passionate about, and I really put a lot of faith into, but I'm not the main person. We, they really speak to a lot of this stuff. That again goes to Calvin Leon, Anthony Z, and our former CTO, Lubu. We're really the three people who quarterback this project. My specific role at Hodabaugh was that of director. So this is the first company where I did get an opportunity to sit on the board for. And the main reason I got the position was literally pure nepotism. My three friends were the co-founders. So when they approached me saying that they had some questions about the law, I decided that I wanted to do something to help them. At the time, I was still a student. So I was completing my JD MBA at Osgoode Hall and Schulich School of Business. So I had no license at the time. But that being said, I figured out that there was a really neat little loophole for students with an interest in law to be able to get involved with these businesses, even in the absence of a license. And that's through taking on the role of a director. So as a director, you have certain duties toward the company. So you do have certain legal obligations, but the level of legal obligations you have is much lower than that of a lawyer. And this allows you to take a lot more risks and be a lot more involved in the business on a day-to-day level than a lawyer who's being hired to take on a file. So, the four of us had really made a promise years and years before that, one day I was going to be their lawyer. And I thought, might as well get a little bit of practice before that. So when the day comes and I do have my license, it'll make it a little bit of an easier transition. So, yeah, the company gave me some shares. It gave me a director seat. And then for the better part of a couple of years, anytime any sort of legal or strategic issue popped up, they would approach me and we'd sit down and we'd swear through. It wasn't easy, I will say, working with friends. It was quite challenging, and there were a lot of very strong personalities on the project, but working together, living together, really building up that trust. It really allowed us to execute on a lot of things, which would have been a lot more difficult with strangers. First of all, on the risk management side, making sure that we're properly managing our risks, offering proper transparency to our users. We're basically operating a cryptocurrency trading algorithm to allow investors to diversify their portfolios through a centralized exchange of their choice by plugging in their API code. So long story short, we're building a self-managed crypto index fund. And on the risk management side, there were a number of sort of different challenges that we had to face for both the legal, but as well as the technological, in terms of the cybersecurity issues of holding our users' API keys, right? And making the relevant checks and assurances to make sure that they felt safe, trusting us with that. So yeah, it was a really complex project. And at the very beginning, I really didn't know too much in terms of a lot of this stuff. So I had to get a lot of outside help from a lot of lawyer friends who were very supportive of our sort of foray into this area. Later on, there were a lot of other sort of issues we did have to deal with as well, ranging from, the share plan to a CEO transition and eventually the exit when the company underwent an exit and Kraken, the cryptocurrency exchange, approached us for a deal in 2019. So, it ended up being a fairly small project and ended up working out a lot better than a lot of people would have guessed for a cryptocurrency company during that time. It was really something that took my all, which I'm glad I was able to sort of muster up for. I hope, Calvin, Anthony, and Lucas, if they're listening to this, they would agree that I contributed a bit of real value here and there for the company. And to this day, we're still very close friends, and I'm looking forward to working on the next venture with them.
Wow, that's awesome to hear. So I think something listeners can gain from this is how important it is to make these lasting friendships in college or university. They can really lead you to other places than you imagine. So my next question for you is, balancing multiple ventures and leadership responsibilities can or seems to be challenging. How do you effectively manage your time and prioritize tasks across your different fields and organizations? What strategies do you employ to ensure each venture receives the requisite attention and allocation of resources?
It's a good question. And yeah, honestly, I don't have a good answer for this. It's still a struggle. There are some tricks that I've figured out. So what my typical schedule looks like during the typical weekday, I work on my main venture, Codify. So I work sales most of the time. And then typically I try to keep my teaching related activities and my volunteer work on the weekends. And that helps to set some degree of separation, but things will pop up. And no matter how much I try to compartmentalize, inevitably you can set a plan, but at the end of the day, I find that it usually doesn't end up working out. Even though it might be able to help, it's challenging. I think I've gotten a lot better with it. For a long time, my mentality was really just, to try to hustle more, work later, wake up earlier, carve out as much as my weekend as I can, and really just try to keep my mind on work nonstop. I think increasingly I've come to realize that that's really not the right approach. As admirable as the hustle is, it's not truly sustainable long term. At least that's been my experience. And I've definitely suffered a lot of burnout over the course of the years. Times where my mind's just been a little bit so frazzled that it feels like it's just working at a snail's pace. I've managed to carve out my evenings, which has been definitely a positive change in the last year. So typically after 7 o'clock, I really try to stick with this commitment not to do any work-related calls and to try to take my mind off work as much as possible and to really force myself to do something else, right? And that helps me keep a little bit more focused during the day because I know there's only so many hours I have in terms of doing what I need to get done. And then during the evenings, it lets me get a little bit more dedicated time for my hobbies. So, I'll play a little bit of guitar, do a little bit of singing. And as of the last couple of weeks, I've been playing a lot of Diablo 4. So taking that little segment of time and making sure that my brain has an opportunity to get some proper rest. Make sure during the times when I am in that kind of flow state, right, that my brain can operate on the best capacity.
Okay, so seems like good hustle requires good hibernation. Now, my next question to you is, you share some of the obstacles you have encountered other than this burnout while building and scaling these organizations and how you have successfully overcome them?
When it comes to challenges in entrepreneurship, it's really like a million and one different things. I think I am very much a big idea person. I'm very much focused on big ideas and broader strategy. Whereas my main points of weaknesses have really been in the realm of tactics and the fundamentals. So I didn't really come from a traditional business background when I first started entrepreneurship. It was only much later that I ended up doing my MBA and building out a little bit more knowledge in the space. But for the first couple of companies that I started up, figuring out cash flow was always really, really challenging for me. That was something that I really just struggled with. And I think a part of it was that, I had like a big picture idea of, a lot of these concepts like product market fit, in terms of competitive advantage. I didn't have the degree of experience and nuance in order to really capitalize on some of that knowledge until I had a chance to work on more projects and to talk with more people with more experience, which was one of the benefits of getting a formal business education. For a long time, I think, figuring out cash flow was definitely a huge struggle in terms of crystallizing some of these big ideas that I had into actual functioning businesses. And this is something that I think it's really not unique to me. A lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that because many of them get in because they have a vision, a dream, something that they want to create that, for one moment is not there, and the next moment they're sort of manifesting into reality, 0 to 1, so to speak, right? And sometimes people who are, really good at thinking that way also struggle with figuring out, okay, what's the next step? How do we actually get there, right? And in my view, there's really two different kinds of CEOs. One who excels at in terms of the vision side of things, and the other who excels on the execution side of things. And there needs to be a sort of a good balance in a team, right? So I think, yeah, one sort of struggle I've had is I tend to lean a little bit more towards the creativity and idea side of things. And, I'll spit out some pretty hot takes every once in a while, things that sound pretty awesome, but from a feasibility standpoint, might not have the level of grounding it needs in order to become an actual successful business solution. So that's something I'm always working on in terms of reminding myself, okay, ideas are great, but it's really important to think it through, not just like skim over these ideas and say, hey, that sounds good, but also really challenging yourself and investigating, hey, is that actually a good idea? Will it actually bring in a good return on investment? What's the risk that you're undertaking by this idea? What's the level of investment that you're putting in? And going through that due diligence. Definitely something I'm working on. But beyond that, the other main challenge, and this isn't so much from a professional standpoint as it is more from a personal one, it's really been in managing money. I'm usually a pretty frugal person. A lot of it, I think, and not to get too politically incorrect here, but a lot of it is, I'm Chinese. And it's kind of built into the culture from a fairly young age. There is a sort of, the ethics of frugality is sort of, been built into me. But at the same time, I've definitely struggled quite a bit financially throughout my life. I didn't grow up with a ton of money, in a small immigrant community out in London, Ontario. And throughout most of my adult life, I've been, hopping from school to school, racking up basically more educational debt, frankly, than I'd like to admit, and doing a lot of very expensive grad school. But, long-term investment, that's the way I rationalize it. In terms of actual, bringing in cash flow, most of it has been through startups. So a lot of the value that I've generated throughout my professional career has been in the form of equity, which, I have a lot of faith in equity. And I think long-term, it's by far the best way to build up value in both yourself and to build up trust, right? In terms of your relationship with others. But the thing with equity is it's often not very liquid. So there's definitely been a few years where I've struggled quite a bit financially, a lot more so than I would have liked. And as a young professional who's fairly well educated, with a lot of friends who have done quite well for themselves, that's always caused a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. What am I doing? Look at all these people who are so much more successful at the same age. Maybe it was a mistake to spend 10 years of doing university. A lot of second guessing in terms of some of the life decisions that I made. So that's been a sort of a struggle. I think increasingly I've been able to come to peace with that and realize at the end of the day, that sort of point of comparison is sort of pointless. As long as you're able to sort of, maintain a decent quality of life and you have enough funding to do what you want and pursue the projects that you want. That's basically every entrepreneur. So even nowadays, sometimes I'll even look back on those harder times and I'll feel a little bit envious of those times where I felt this real sense of hustle.
For sure. I'm glad you were able to overcome those obstacles and kind of reflect back on how your path led to where you are now. So I'm just going to pass the mic on to Sophie, and she has some more questions for you in that regard.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you for all of your insights, John. Those were great answers. I would love to ask our final question. So do you have any advice or words of wisdom to impart to aspiring entrepreneurs who aspire to make their mark in respective industries?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this as succinct as I can. There's really two things I would say from my perspective that I think are really important. The first one is creativity. This sort of perspective that creativity is not necessarily the key thing. We can see this in a lot of schools in terms of cutting funding to the arts, as an example, right? Or the de-emphasis in terms of creativity in certain parts of academia. At least that was really my experience. But I think if you really want to do entrepreneurship, you have to be creative. If you're not able to think outside the box, if you're not able to imagine things that don't exist, if you're not able to step out of your own mind and challenge your own beliefs on a regular basis, and you're not able to come up with visions that excite others around you, you're going to have a really tough time. I would even extend beyond entrepreneurship to just business in general. With the way that the world is changing and the way that a lot of these technologies, especially generative AI, are coming out, it's more important than ever for humans to be able to leverage those creative muscles in order to do things that machines cannot. At the end of the day, we cannot pass our thinking over to the machines. Machines can be great tools, but in terms of the thinking, that has to come from humans. I think Creativity is, for me, and one of the big drivers of my life. I look at the successful entrepreneurs around me, the ones I work with, and it's a huge part of their lives. And I see it being a bigger and bigger and bigger part going forward with this technology. The second one, and this kind of ties in with the answer I gave Crystal to that last question. And the word I used to use was resilience, but I had a really great chat with a friend of mine a few years ago, and he gave me a better word, which is anti-fragility. There's a really great book on it for anyone who does want to take a look. I haven't gotten a chance yet, but it's on my list. The main difference is that resilience is basically your ability to take hits and to deal with it and then push on through it. And that's good. You have to have resilience. You have to get through the tough times. But the way he broke down anti-fragility to me is it's not just resilience, like being to weather the storm, but the ability to grow and thrive as a result of stressors, as a result of, shocks in terms of volatility, in terms of conflict. When a storm comes, you don't see it as, oh, I have to survive this and get through this. But you see it as, this is going to be so much fun, like battling the storm and getting through it. And it's going to be legendary when I finally get through it. And I'm going to come out the other side way stronger. Having that sort of anti-fragile mindset of, that things are going to go wrong. You're going to go through tough times. It's going to be up and down and you're going to end up with a whole bunch of failures all throughout the years. But realizing that every time it hits you, taking the mentality that it's not just, hey, I overcame this, but I overcame this and it's made me so much stronger. Not just in business, but in life. For everyone who's listening, just one final word. If you are interested in entrepreneurship, don't wait. I was always in the mentality like, oh, I got to do this, have this level of education, finish grad school. And then looking back, the only thing I wish I did a little bit earlier was starting sooner. So if you got a dream, go out and chase it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, those are definitely wise words, and they will be very invaluable to our listeners. And we hope that they take heed of those in their careers moving forward and hopefully in their entrepreneurial ventures as well. So that concludes our final question for you today, John. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today to our podcast and for giving us your time and sharing all of your wise words. And I really hope that this was fun for you as well. And I hope to stay in contact with you as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. Thank you, Crystal.